This is Module 2 lecture. In this lecture, we are focusing on socioeconomic status and its relationship to health and health outcome. In Module 1 lecture, I discussed socioeconomic status, or SES, and its correlates as important determinants of health outcome and health disparities. Various measures are used to assess SES: income level, level of education, occupation. Socioeconomic status is very much a subjective measure by which we determine one's social class, social standing, and their prestige within a society or community. Your social class, economic status impacts every area of one's life. There's a large body of research that has shown SES to be strongly and significantly predictive of both physical and psychological health. The ability to provide financially for yourself or your family has numerous implications for your nutritional health, their nutritional health. And if you have numerous people living in a community within wherein people are unable to feed themselves or their family, there's going to be a communal level effect in terms of a health outcome of residents within that community. SES indicators and associated health risk. A study conducted by Case and colleagues published in 2021 shows by the age of 25, a person with a college degree is predicted to live 10 years longer than a person who drops out of high school. Several studies, including a study by Robata et al., published in 2017, also demonstrate education as either a risk factor or protective factor to health outcome across different groups. Those researchers also found that among men who completed graduate school, they had lower odds of developing heart disease than those with a grade school degree. And other work that included among women who had lower levels of education had greater risk for cardiovascular diseases than those with higher levels of education. Low educational achievement or attainment, which can be defined by the proportion of the population of age 25 of older who have less than a high school diploma or equivalent GED or some college, plays an important role in terms of prevalence rates of heart disease related death among racial groups. For example, there are huge differences between African Americans and whites in terms of heart disease related deaths, with the African Americans being shown to be more likely impacted. Hispanic compared to whites are more likely to be impacted by this condition as well. Of course, we will look at race and ethnicity in subsequent modules. Folks with low levels of education tend to lack social and political power and economic resources. Correspondingly, they tend to have remedial jobs, experience financial hardship, which in turn can lead to housing insecurity, living in poor conditions, food insecurity. These problems over time can lead to many adverse health consequences, including premature mortality. When folks live in adverse conditions, they tend to be exposed to many stressors, as you can think of. Crime, violence, abuse, and without having access to resources to help them cope, these stressors over time can really wreak havoc on the body and therefore increasing one's risk for various chronic conditions like hypertension. Hypertension, as you may know, is among the leading causes of premature death worldwide. chronic stress can cause or worsen structural changes in the heart and blood vessels, which can lead to inflammation, consistent vasoconstriction, which then in turn can increase your blood pressure. And eventually, over time, with this wear and tear on the body, this can lead to a person developing hypertension. People with hypertension and other chronic conditions who live in poverty are less likely to engage in regular care or adhere to medication treatment to treat their condition. Educational achievement is important since it's related to so many things, including employment and, of course, income. According to Ryan and Goodrum, school officials to unfairly discipline African American children, with them receiving high rates of expulsion or suspension compared to other racial groups. This in turn impact academic achievement, as I mentioned, including early dropouts. And of course, job opportunities later in adulthood, and eventually academic stability. School expulsion and suspension are shown to be highly correlated with various unhealthy risk behaviors, including substance use, violent behaviors, and gang affiliation. So educational achievement, which there is a racial differences among who gets, in terms of, there's a racial differences among African Americans and whites, and these are socially constructed, of course. There's no natural structure that could explain that. And several studies looking at early on or very early risk factors show that school expulsion and suspension really indirectly plays a role in chronic diseases that you see eventually in adulthood among this racial group. Employment is another measure of socioeconomic status, or SES. A lot of research has shown employment to really strongly predict health outcomes. So folks who are recently unemployed or have not been employed for a short period of time may not be able to receive public benefits, including public health insurance. So with lack of employment or steady employment, folks may not be able to afford co-payments regardless of how little it may be. So if you have a condition for which you're not receiving care, it is not surprising that your symptoms over time will likely worsen and therefore negatively impact your quality of life. So with lack in employment, there's a lot of things that are impacted in your ability to engage in care or continue in care is adversely impacted. Income is another indicator, of socioeconomic status. So very low income household, folks who live below poverty line, federal poverty guideline, which is measured by several indicators, including income, number of people you support by the income, cost of living in that particular region, etc., are increased risk. So folks who live below poverty line are at increased risk for many health problems. So children in those households, as you can see, are fairly placed, are placed at a really disadvantage early on because they don't have an optimal environment to help them succeed. So income impacts so many aspect of one's life and is a strong determinant of health in terms of where you live. So if you look at the relationship here, so living in poverty, you have lack of access to resources or low resources to access in order to cope. And it could be just resources for just basic needs, like such as healthy eating, being able to feed your family. So when you live within a neighborhood where there's high poverty, the school system that children tend to have access to is poorly equipped. So you don't have a school system that's really helping children to increase their level of readiness for high school, if they're in middle school, for high school, college, and so on. With poor education early on, that trajectory into adulthood lead to lack of housing or housing insecurity. So housing insecurity, people were being housed, living in insecure places, or having housing insecurity rather, tend to live in unsafe neighborhood, because unsafe neighborhood, their rent levels, their rent brackets are much more affordable in comparison to neighborhood wherein crime is low. So correspondingly, what we see is that all of these factors in a row, predicting one another or impacting one another, lead the person to continuously be in a state of stress. So why does stress matter? Why do we care about stress? Well, stress such as anxiety does not only happen in the mind and it stays there. Elevated stress can make your body feel as if there is actually a dangerous thing within your environment. So the body needs to react as if it needs to prepare to either fight or flight. Accordingly, when the body is in that state, that fight or flight mode, it enacts various stress hormones in our brain. It enacts our central nervous system. So catecholamines are brain hormones that are associated with fight or flight. So when you're anxious, and of course I'm not talking about normal level of anxiety, which is kind of needed for you to get tasks done, because you're somewhat anxious, so that could be, really a factor for you to focus on the task and get it done. What I'm talking about is such elevated increased anxiety that it impacts level of functioning. So that level of anxiety, the physiological impact of the brain is that it impacts our hypothalamus, and this is the structure of the brain that's responsible for keeping your body in a balanced state. It is associated with both your endocrine system and your nervous system. So the hypothalamus tells our adrenal glands to release stress hormones, right? Like adrenaline and cortisol. So these things over time, so these hormones increase your heartbeat and blood flow to various muscles, so you can have muscle tightness, increased heart rate, because the body feels like it's in a flight or fight mode. So by increasing your heart rate, pumping blood to your muscles and other important organs to help you fight or flight, the body is just constantly working. It's working not its optimal level, because when we are in a fight or flight mode, what happens is that our other system, like our digestive system, is reduced, because we're in a survival mode. We are in a survival mode. So cortisol, which is, it's a stress hormone. It's released within your bloodstream. It releases sugar or glucose within your bloodstream, and too much cortisol over time, impacts your body and places you at risk for developing so many chronic conditions, including type 2 diabetes. So chronic stress over time tells the body it's in danger. So the body is not working the various processes that we need to have for our body to work optimally. Those processes are impacted because the body has to react in a way that is protective, therefore trying to protect you from the danger that it believes is within your physical environment. Even though the anxiety is happening in your brain, the body does not know that it's happening, only it's being perceived. Rather, the physiological impact you have as you are anxious, muscle tension, panic, it as if you're being chased by a violent animal. So think about the chronic effect of stress, and anxiety, as an important determinant of health, of physical health, of course, mental health. So your environment, despite what's going on in your environment, the body, when you feel anxious, when you're experiencing all these symptoms, muscle tension, panic, shortness of breath, feeling panicky, it enacts various hormones in our body, which in turn impact other systems, and over time wreaks havoc on your body, placing you at risk for so many chronic conditions. So a CDC report, I believe it was a 2020 report, or published in 2020, shows that income inequality is just being, the gap, it continues to be really huge among various groups. So according to that report, for every dollar of wealth that a white households have, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, and African American household have 83 cents, 7 cents, and 6 cents respectively. So how long you live is associated with income, right? Has been shown to be associated with income. That does not mean everybody who is wealthy is going to live longer than those who's not wealthy, than other groups that are not wealthy. But it's shown to have a significant relationship, income and education and life expectancy, and so is income. Income is associated. One study showed that a difference of 14.6 years between the wealthy top 1% earners and the bottom 1% earners. So wealth is associated with longer life, since of course it provides you access to not only resources, but quality resources, and also remove the various financial related stress that somebody may have who is struggling financially. And of course, we will look at race and ethnicity in subsequent modules, and looking at differential health outcomes and prevalences and incidence rates of diseases among racial and ethnic groups. A study conducted by Abdullah and colleagues found that the wealthiest 20% at significantly lower risk for cardiovascular diseases, or CVD. And those indices, lower risk factors indices, include, they have a healthy body mass index, or BMI, and BMI is measured, as you may know, by your weight and your height. They also had healthier systolic blood pressure. This is the first measure on your blood pressure, which is how your heart, is contracting and pushing blood out to your arteries. High density lipoprotein, or good cholesterol, is also associated with liver health. So all three of these factors elevated, including high density protein, or HDL, are risk factors for heart disease or stroke. And of course, catecholamines means that catecholamines are involved, which I mentioned earlier, which are involved in the flight or fight response, are involved in depression and high blood pressure. So because these hormones are involved in the fight or flight, your body being in that mode all the time, chronically being in that mode, is a risk factor for increased blood pressure and other chronic conditions. And the major depressive disorder is a chronic condition, psychiatric condition. So food insecurity, which is another indicator of socioeconomic status. A 2020 report by USDA showed that 10.5%, I believe, of household is predicted to experience some type of food insecurity. And food insecurity is basically discontinuation of food intake or eating because of financial difficulties. So basically not eating or not eating enough because the person does not have sufficient funds to feed themselves or their family. Food insecurity is associated with metabolic dysregulation, which can be defined as just clusters of factors that represent various risks for poor health outcome, like BMI, high BMI, HDL, hypertension, glucose, systolic blood pressure. So all of these indicators elevated. It is a composite measure, can be used as a composite measure for metabolic dysregulation. So many households face what is referred to as monetary trade, deciding whether to purchase medication or buy food, or deciding whether to buy food or pay the rent. So there's a lot of risk factor for the insecurities. There's a lot of trickle down factors in terms of the financial capability to provide for oneself and for their family is associated with income. So if your income is low in terms of your cost of living, you're likely to suffer from food insecurity and other associated factors with living in poverty or living in an income that is not conducive to the cost of living. Various psychological stressors are associated with not having enough to eat, include depression, anxiety, which in turn physiologically impact cortisol levels by increasing it. Moreover, to cope, because people were distressed over time, want to get out of that state on an average, engage in unhealthy behaviors as a way of coping, such as smoking, binge drinking, sexual promiscuity. And of course, these behaviors, unhealthy behaviors, put them at risk for developing other chronic conditions. Housing insecurity is another indicator of socioeconomic status. It is defined as loss of housing due to increasing costs relative to one's income. This term encompasses several housing-related problems, including unsafe and poor quality of residence, unstable physical infrastructure, or overcrowdedness. Exposure to secondhand smoking, which is very much prevalent in poor housing conditions, often in public housing. Secondhand smoking is associated with increased risk for developing cancers and other cancers in a respiratory condition. Another factor that correlates, that's associated with being in these poor infrastructure, or which unfortunately is prevalent among a lot of public housing, including those in New York City, possibly in Long Island, is third-hand smoking, which is not often talked about as much as second-hand smoking, but third-hand smoking, which is much more problematic for children, because if children live in homes with smokers and smoking gets on every surface, including toys, if the child puts the toy in their mouth or some type of other thing in their mouth, they're taking in tobacco, for example, that way. Over time, third-hand smoking can have a debilitating effect on development and overall quality of life. People who report housing insecurity also tend to underutilize care or delay getting care. And what we see in the literature, they also tend to use the emergency care more frequently in comparison to folks who are housing secure. Additionally, housing insecure individuals tend to experience poor health outcome, which is not surprising given the tendency to delay care or underutilize medical care. Chronic psychological distress, for example, due to eviction, being evicted, or having your home foreclosed on, can lead to various severe outcomes such as suicide, suicide attempts and suicide. A Habit for Humanity report showed that being a homeowner is associated with good mental health, which makes sense because once you own your home, you own your own property, you can have more control over where you live and things you're exposed to. Edmond et al. Indicated that folks who are home ownership reported lower depression, better psychological health than folks who were non-home owners. Another explanation is that achieving this milestone, becoming a homeowner, is associated with improved mood, improved psychological health, because it's such an important milestone. So let's do a recap in terms of socioeconomic status and how it relates to health and mental health outcome. It has several indicators that have shown to be strong determinants of how people fare mentally and physically. Education and income are among the top correlates of health disparities. Education and income are associated with so many health problems across different populations. Both education and income are related to various biomarkers that are used in various indices of health, like BMI, systolic blood pressure, lipoprotein. So food insecurity and housing security, which are associated with income, your income level, as well as level of education, are important risk factors for numerous psychological as well as numerous adverse psychological and physical conditions. These are some references that could further increase your understanding on socioeconomic status and its differential determinants of health. Of course, I'm sure you have a lot to do for the summer, but these are some of the resources that can really that look at various studies that have been done around socioeconomic status, its correlates in terms of health outcome. All right, I will see you in the next module. Have a good one.